you have to think about psychedelics as if you think about fire, let's say, right? You can use fire to cook your meal, to get warm in winter, but you can use fire to burn the house or burn yourself. If you don't know what you are doing, fire can be dangerous, right? But if you know how to harness it, then it can be very beneficial, right? So we can use that analogy to think about psychedelics in the same way. Hey, this is Mike Sigula from TruthTheory.com, and welcome to another episode of True Spirituality. This is my series on metaphysics, esotericism, mysticism, and spirituality. And if you're new here, please subscribe, because this is already episode 40. So in this episode, we will talk about pros and cons of using plant medicines or psychedelics for spiritual growth, for our spiritual evolution. And there will be 2 additional videos where I will share with you how to prepare and set up for plant medicine ceremony and how to protect yourself in case of some kind of psychic attacks or negative events during plant medicine ceremonies. So these 2 additional videos are actually exclusive on Patreon. So patreon.com/truththeory. We have exclusive content there, and these 2 other videos are only for Patreon members. So let's talk about what are some of the pros and cons of using plant medicines. So more and more people are interested in things like ayahuasca, for example. These days, this topic is becoming very popular. A lot of people want to give it a try, want to try some kind of plant medicines, go to South America, have a retreat, and have an enlightening experience. First thing is that this is not a magic bullet, right? I see a lot of people who think that this is gonna just fix their lives, or they're gonna get some kind of enlightenment overnight and things like that. In some rare cases, this is possible, but typically you still have to do a lot of work afterwards, right? So you might get a glimpse into what is that you need to heal, for example, but then the integration starts afterwards, and you need to start applying the changes, which might take another several months or years or whatever it is that you're trying to heal. So this is just an example. Do not think about these things as some kind of a magic solution to all my problems or anything like that. That's kind of not really how it works. Sometimes it can in some rare cases, but overall things are much more complex than that. Also, there are dangers to using psychedelics, and this is something that we have to understand before we decide to go towards this path. So in my life, I've had my first experiences 20 years ago, and I didn't have crazy number of sessions, but enough to get a full spectrum of experiences. And I had some of the most profound experiences of my life, where I understood nature of reality, who I am. I was able to access higher levels of consciousness, all sorts of fascinating things. And I would say that some of these experiences that I've had were the most profound experiences of my life. But I also had some of the worst experiences of my life. So like I said, there were some incredible things, and there were some extremely negative things as well. That's why I want to kind of warn people, because it's not just beautiful like a lot of people think it is, and there are dangers as well. And over the next 3 videos we will go through what are some of the dangers, how to avoid these dangers, And in case if you have anything like, for example, what I've been going through, which is like absolute hardcore, how you can protect yourself, how you can get out of it. So I just want to kind of give you some ideas here. But you have to think about psychedelics as, if you think about fire, let's say, right? You can use fire to cook your meal, to get warm in winter, but you can use fire to burn the house or burn yourself. If you don't know what you are doing, fire can be dangerous, right? But if you know how to harness it, then it can be very beneficial, right? So we can use that analogy to think about psychedelics in the same way. So for example, the psychedelics can amplify your mind, can amplify your consciousness, can elevate it, can help you to tune into your higher self or your subconscious or other levels of consciousness. And you can get a lot of benefits through this process. You can get insights about your own healing, your own life, what is the nature of reality, things like that. But also can be very dangerous as well if you don't know what you're doing. If you know, sometimes people have accidents. So you need to be aware of these things. And I see a lot of content on the internet that is just glorifying psychedelics as this magic bullet, and I see a lot of people who get hyped, and I used to be like that as well, and I had some really bad experiences, and I'm not the only one as well. So I just want to kind of give people balanced perspective for anyone who will decide to go towards this path. So one of the first things is that, you know, psychedelics are kind of amplifiers for consciousness, right? You're raising your consciousness level. You can open your third eye, your pineal gland. Now, what are the good and bad sides? What are the pros and cons of that? So for example, if you're someone who is unstable emotionally or maybe psychologically, right? Psychedelics can be dangerous in some rare cases because, for example, you might have a very powerful experience where you kind of lose touch with reality, of what is real, what is not real, and you might take something too seriously, and then you might actually do something silly and you know, have a real world consequences, right? So for example, I had a situation where I kind of had an ego death, let's say. An ego death is when you have you kind of like lose your identity. So obviously, you know, some people have like a super strong ego death where they don't even know if they're male or female. In my case, it wasn't that strong, but I thought them in a different realm, and I felt attacked. I was under attack, and I started protecting myself, which caused actual consequences in the place I was physically in. So, you know, that's because the dose was too strong. I had some psychic attacks, and you know, that's in a summary what happened. But you also need to be aware of these things. You know, sometimes people do it first time, maybe the dose is way too strong for them, and they start taking things too seriously, and something negative can happen. You know, I'm just giving you warnings here, but remember that these things are pretty rare. In most cases, people are gonna have beneficial experiences, but there are several things that we need to be aware of. So another thing, for example, is that, you know, I've read a lot of accounts of people who do DMT and they just end up in a completely different dimension or world. And for example, they see some kind of entities feeding of them, or like they end up on some kind of in some kind of an experiment, and there is a bunch of like gray aliens doing some experiment on them somewhere else. And then the question is, was it just hallucination? Was it real? And the funny thing is that, you know, if you keep repeating same things, a lot of people see the same types of beings. From what I know, what might happen is that because you're existing at different levels, you have, you know, different versions of your body that can, for example, like your astral body, that can suddenly end up in a different frequency, different channel, different density, let's say. And because you didn't protect yourself, you are having someone who is actually trying to do something negative to you. So what you do there might affect what's happening here as well. So that's why protection is extremely important, you know. I've seen people saying things like on the internet, like, oh, can I mix it with alcohol? No, if you want to have a spiritual experience, right, you need to treat it with respect. That's why everyone always talks about settings. You know, when you do preparation, right, you start setting your intentions in advance, then it is more likely that you will get what you wanted, right? That's why we have settings, and because they work as a form of amplifier, if the settings aren't correct, let's say, I don't know, one time I was in a place which was very noisy, and what happened was that all these noises were making me very anxious, and you know, I kind of had a bad trip in a way because of that. So a lot of things to consider when you think about using plant medicines and psychedelics. Another thing, you know, a lot of people go to South America to these retreat places, but you know how many quacky shamans are there? When you go to a place like that, it has to be a place that you can trust, right? You know, there's probably like, I don't know, half of these shamans are not very good, or, you know, they are not necessarily working for the light, let's say. What happens is that when you go to a place like that, you give yourself in hands of this person that you don't know. Maybe they are good guys, maybe they're not, maybe they know what they're doing, maybe not. And you know, in a way, you give away your free will to them, so they are the ones setting up conditions for you, and this is something you need to be aware of, right? So you always need to do your research properly, even if you decide to do mushrooms with a friend, let's say. This has to be someone who knows what they're doing, who is experienced. You probably should start with a much smaller dose, just as a kind of test, and maybe the second session will be the proper one, because you never know how you're gonna react. For example, you know, I tried ayahuasca first time, they gave me a smaller dose, and it was way too strong for me, and I had like some really bad experience. So, you know, you never know how you're gonna react, right? Most people are gonna be fine, most people are gonna have great experiences, but maybe one person in 100 or whatever are gonna go through some very, very difficult, challenging experience. So sometimes we hear about so-called bad trips. Really, most of the time, bad trip is basically the medicine or your higher self is trying to give you a little slap in your face. So let's say you have some destructive pattern and you need to heal that or whatever, and it's just gonna be very brutal with you and show you that in a way that you're gonna remember that for the next few months, so you can apply the changes afterwards, right? So this is sometimes, you know, why people have bad trips, but obviously there can be many reasons. You know, think about it this way: you take plant medicines, you open your third eye, and you open yourself to these other worlds and entities that can be good or bad. You know, there are loads of different entities out there, that some of them are good, some of them are bad. So that's why, for example, there is a protection always. Like if you do a session with an experienced shaman, you know, they smudge the place with the smoke, they smudge the person. These kind of things apparently are not really that helpful as a lot of people think, but they do prayers to protect yourself, things like that, right? Because you don't want to have uninvited guests to like disrupt your session or try to influence you, and this happens. Anyway, so I don't want to scare anyone here. I'm just kind of giving you different perspectives. I know that most people have good experiences, and like I said, you know, it can be like really positive, can be very negative as well. So I'm just giving you some ideas here. Another thing is that really like your state on a day-to-day basis is often important, because if you are like abusing yourself with, I don't know, addiction issues, alcohol, things like that, sometimes what might happen, the session is going to be healing for you. It's going to kind of help you to get out of it, right? Other times it's just going to be amplified. You're going to get a slap in your face. It's going to be very brutal. And definitely, if you have some psychological problems, this is something you need to like really research properly, because sometimes there is a research out there that they can be beneficial, but they can also cause a lot of problems. Like, for example, I've knew someone 20 years ago who started abusing mushrooms, and this person never was the same afterwards, right? Months later I would meet this guy and he seemed like he wasn't really integrated in this life here. It was kind of in between. So again, most people probably no problems at all, very rare issues, sometimes maybe bad trip, let's say, but sometimes there are also bad situations. So you need to be aware of these things. Think about it this way. You want to drive a car, you can get from point A to point B 10 times faster or 100 times faster, but you need to know how to drive that car, right? And you need to be aware that in some rare occasions or cases there might be an accident. Same thing here. It can amplify, get you to some things that you would probably get without psychedelics, maybe 100 times faster sometimes, but at the same time, because it's a powerful tool, it can bring some consequences, negative consequences as well. Sometimes there are accidents. So in the next two videos, we will talk about how to set up these sessions to get the most from these sessions, to have an enlightening experience, and how to protect yourself, because protection when you're doing plant medicines is extremely important. And I had some serious scenarios, like I said, some of the worst things ever, and I kind of, because I understand the techniques, I was able to protect myself. So this is what you're going to talk about in the next two videos, which are only for our Patreon supporters. So if you want to support this project, go to patreon.com/TruthTheory. And thank you for checking this episode of True Spirituality. Until next time.